Welcome to all of you to our fourth session of our head-scratching sayings of Jesus. If you are able to, if you have a room that has some background noise, please do mute yourself. But if it's relatively quiet where you are, then I think it works that you can keep yourself unmuted. But today, we're going to be looking at a passage that is another one of those that, man, it just comes off on certain levels as being offensive, really. And it's odd. It's odd placement, at least at first blush, because what we're talking about is this passage of Matthew 15, 21 to 28, where it's these instructions basically, and also in Matthew 10, it backs this up, but it's this idea of don't go anywhere near the Gentiles, don't heal them, don't exorcise them, you know, they're demons and all that. So it's odd because how does Matthew's gospel start? With this incredibly powerful genealogy, which is not a genealogy of bloodlines, but it's a spiritual genealogy. Okay, that's the difference. And it's a genealogy that includes many Gentiles, who, and specifically Gentile women who were instrumental in sort of furthering the message and the existence, really, of God's people through the ages, leading down to the time of Jesus. So you've got that to start with. You've got an early healing of a Roman centurion's child or slave. It's a word that could be interpreted as either. But there's a healing that happens there, and the language that comes from Jesus right in this, it's like chapter 4. He says, I haven't met anyone in Israel with more faith than you. It's a wonderful story. Okay, wonderful, just connected and inclusive, no questions asked, right? Then in chapter 8, we go to the land of the Gadarenes, which if you look at the geography, it's about 6.5 miles southwest or southeast, or just near the Sea of Galilee. And it's one of the 10 cities of the Decapolis. Okay, that's Greek cities. Those are Gentile cities. Decapolis meaning 10 cities. It's like a league of Gentile cities in that area. And the Gadarenes, he exorcises the demons of 2 people there, Jesus does. So anyway, we've got all of these very positive interactions, very inclusive language from the outset of Matthew's gospel. And then we have this bizarre, as I said, if you look at it at first blush, especially from a modern lens, it sounds offensive, like racist, sexist, dismissive, like what's going on? Okay, not only does he say to this woman who is begging him, okay, she's a Canaanite woman, okay, she's Gentile, she's not Jewish, begs him to help, begs Jesus to help her daughter. Jesus basically says, no, I'm here for the lost sheep of Israel, not you. And then he takes it one step further and says, you know, basically talks to her like she's a dog. Okay, he uses that language. It might be it might have to do with a little puppy, but listen, it's not. It doesn't really help either way. You know, it doesn't sound good. And what are we supposed to do with this? What do we do? Well, what we're going to do today is look at it from multiple perspectives, both from what Jesus is saying when he's talking about, you know, the ones that he has come to shepherd, the ones that we're all called to shepherd as disciples. And also, we're going to look at the woman herself, who basically doesn't allow Jesus or anyone to treat her like a sheep. Okay. So that's the setup for today's text. Yeah, go Peter. I want to know if there's any questions or comments that you might have having read this text, or, you know, just anything that you've learned about it previously, or just whatever it might be on your mind, comments or thoughts initially. Marilyn and then Bonnie.
Yeah, you can probably always count on me to raise my hand. But anyway, the one thought I had, but what you've just told us about the background in Matthew, or what's happened so far, makes what I came up with not work very well. But I was almost wondering if if we were seeing Jesus's growth, that when we see him behaving in a way that we wished he wouldn't, and then so at the end, he does help the daughter. And he's very complimentary to the woman about her faith and that she has demonstrated to him. And so it almost kind of looks like growth on his part happening, which if he is human, there are going to be times when he will need to grow. And I just wondered if this was maybe one of them, but.
Well, some commentators have taken that tact, because when you look at it and you take it at face value and you don't try to explain it, which there's a good reason to do it that way, because we need not explain away everything. But sometimes there's subtleties that we can miss in our modern translation. But nonetheless, many commentators have taken that tack that you just named, that Jesus was perhaps voicing something that he felt. Maybe he was caught off guard. Maybe it was something that then he learned or grew or found himself convinced, and that it was that sort of, tenacity of her faith that changed him. I find that fairly unconvincing, but not because, well, put it this way, it could be, but in context with the greater gospel, that's where it loses me a bit. It just sort of seems too, just sort of inserted like that. And I think there are other tacts for getting behind this that might be, let's just say, more convincing. And that again, that's subjective. And I named it that way on purpose, because it may not lay flat, but it's good to name these ways, because there are a lot of ways that people have grappled with this text, and the one you just named is certainly one of them.
Well, but I started what I said with saying that, having heard what you said about other parts in the gospel, it made my explanation sort of less valid.
Yeah, less convincing, or it gave it less sort of roots. It just feels sort of maybe inserted there, if that's what it is. And again, it could be, but that's where, when I look at it on a broader scale, and maybe we'll get to do that together and say, okay, maybe there's something else. But it's not to say that it couldn't be that. It's just there's not going to be that singular path through this text. I had Bonnie and then Bertie. The killer bees.
I was thinking that it was an example of Christ saying to his disciples, kind of like, well, hasn't it always been like this? And the examples that come to mind are things like slavery or the women's suffrage movement or something. I mean, where someone could say, well, isn't it such and such? Isn't it such and such? It's always been that way. And he's kind of saying, you have Israel, you have the Jewish nation, and then you have the Gentiles, and aren't the Jews better? And aren't we, not sort of, helping out the Gentiles because they're those other people? And it's almost like a redundancy that to make the disciples think, well, yeah, we have always done it that way, but is that the way we should be doing it? I guess that was my take on it.
I think that's a wonderful perspective, and we'll come back to that one, okay? We'll flesh that one out a little bit, but that is another take that people look at this. Is Jesus speaking because he's speaking out of his own beliefs, or is he voicing something else that's reflective of his society or the attitudes within his disciples? That's a very appropriate question to ask as well. Thank you, Bonnie. Bertie?
Yes, my thinking's similar to Bonnie's. He doesn't interact with the woman until his disciples arrive. And so I think he's waiting for a teachable moment. And I think he knows ahead of time what he's going to say. And his first words are really the thinking of his disciples. That's how they would think. And so when he turns it around and heals the daughter, they must have been shocked. And that shock would help cement the learning for them. And I think there's a couple of lessons to take away from this. And one is the importance of faith, and then that faith is really for anybody.
I think, yeah, you're naming a lot of great sort of perspectives here, Bertie. And yes, the nature of faith is kind of touched on in this story, both in terms of the woman and then the greater picture of faith that's being shaped in his disciples, and what this message means, and who the sheep are, who are the ones for whom the message belongs, or to whom the message belongs. So yeah, we're going to come to all of that too. But that's sort of, yes, you and Bonnie are really naming that very powerful, I think, perspective within this text that helps lend another pathway through it. Did I say, yes, Patty?
I think at least it's important for me to look at this. This is biography. This is a biography about Jesus. It's one of the different kinds of ways Jesus was remembered, a different kind of styles. And it was written after the temple had collapsed. It was written in the context of Paul, who had a totally different attitude. I mean, Paul was really for the Gentiles. And so I don't know who's really speaking here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's Jesus that is speaking, or the person who wrote this, who was very probably in a place of turmoil after the Second Temple collapsed, and wanting to protect the Jewish traditions that had been really demolished in some sense. That's what I think is important, is when I'm trying to understand where Jesus is, I have to understand that I'm hearing it through the voices of people who may not have known him, but who heard about him, and who were touched by him, like we're touched by him. But whatever really happened has to be looked at, in a complex way out of many, many different places. So this place is somebody's opinion about what Jesus said, and that's how I have to hold it.
And that's an important perspective. The first word you used, one of the first words when you said biography, Gospels are not autobiography. They are not historical report. They are multiple generations of distance that take a theological kind of perspective and shape story into meaning. And they shape events and memory into hope and possibility for a future in the context of a world that's happening around them, that's being reshaped, sometimes in very terrifying ways, as in the fall of the temple. So absolutely, we are always seeing, when we say Jesus said, well, we're saying what Matthew or Mark or Luke or John says that Jesus said. And even to say that, we don't know who Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John is, since those were names that were not included with the original texts of their Gospels. They were only assigned later. We've talked about that. So a lot of this stuff, we just have to kind of take that sort of more, that just remember that perspective there. And so we're always aware, okay, who is this that's speaking? Is it possible to determine who's speaking? What is the form of the communication? Does that matter? Okay. Were people reading this, or were they hearing it? Does that matter? So we'll look at that too, and we'll consider, how some of these challenging lines might be nuanced or impacted depending on the way people were hearing them in the different contexts.
Can I just say one more thing, Dan? That
Sure.
The part of it that really strikes me is the whole notion of faith. That's extraordinarily powerful. The fact that he says your faith has helped you, and even in that context where the speaker is saying we're only here for the house of Israel, he's reporting that we're not here only for the house of Israel. So he either was very confused about what was going on, and he might well have been. And we're seeing his confusion in that example, which I think is interesting, because faith really mattered to him too. It seems faith is a very powerful influence on this story.
And we'll look at what is her faith, what is the nature of her faith, from the way the story presents it. And I don't see a lot of confusion in Jesus. in the character of Jesus in this story. It doesn't seem to be that he's kind of waffling or wishy-washy or just sort of like clutching at things. He seems to be the way it's presented, it's like just well aware of how this is playing out. And as Bonnie or Bertie said, he doesn't really interact with this woman until the disciples are near. And so there's important details. And, I think we're getting close, and maybe it's a good time now to read this aloud and just pay attention to those details and how then they may inform what this passage is trying to say. Okay, it's not a long passage, it's just one paragraph. So a lot is included, as is often the case. A lot is included in one, small passage. In fact, could I just get one volunteer to read the passage today? Because it's since it's shorter.
I'll read
Thanks,
it.
Perry. Okay, let me do a share here.
No, he's going to read it on the screen.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
The Canaanite woman's faith. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just when a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly.
Thank you. It's very poignant, isn't it? There's something, it's very, I don't know, sometimes I get a chill when I see, how the interaction happens. And maybe it's because it stirs other sort of examples or awarenesses in me. But as we look at this, I want to kind of get into a little bit more of the context of some of the things being discussed in here. So he talks about being there for the lost sheep of Israel. And again, it picks up on that classic imagery of shepherd and sheep. The name pastor comes from, the being a shepherd. And so we often hear, God as a shepherd, a pastor as a shepherd. And then there's this association at times with the followers or the congregation or the church being like sheep. And I want to know that in your mind, is a congregation called to be like sheep, or how not? What does that mean to be like sheep? I know it's a little bit of a broad question, but I think it's important to get a little bit behind this. Do you think a congregation is meant to be like sheep? What does it mean to be like sheep? Is that a positive in your mind, to be like sheep? Certainly not in the modern context, right? Barbara?
Well, I just read a book about sheep herders and
Yeah.
the sheep are really not, they are just worthless. They're sort of just go their own way unless there's somebody there directing them. They go hither and they go yon, and they go over cliffs and down into gullies and drown themselves. They really need somebody to take care of them all the time.
And I think you're absolutely right that the way sheep are presented, both biblically and in future references, they are docile, they're sort of incapable, they need a lot of help. And so what happens is you get sometimes this translation, you see it still in many churches today, where you have the shepherd, the pastor, who leads with that more authoritative style, and the sheep the congregation are treated like sheep, and they're not supposed to question, right? They're not supposed to do anything except yes and obey. That is still, I mean, that was very prominent within Catholicism until, say, Vatican II in the 1960s, but still many churches have that sort of style. Even if they sort of purport to be different, there's still very much that sort of relationship. And yet, within the context of this very gospel and all the gospels, the followers, the ones who really get it, are the ones who question, who don't take no for an answer, who get in there and they ask for clarification, they challenge, they're advancing, they're moving, they're independent. You know, they think for themselves. Yeah, there's something there. And yet we receive this metaphor of sheep shepherd, and we sort of maybe apply it too generally at times. So I want to just be aware of that. This sheep thing, the lost sheep of Israel and the whole shepherd sheep thing, is a powerful image. But I think it's meant more to convey something about the shepherd and the protection and the care of the shepherd than necessarily conveying on us, you know, this is how we should be. Because the truth is, the model for followers, for disciples, is much different than that within the Gospels, and certainly within Matthew's Gospel. Jane, and then Patty.
Well, and our church has, you know, we at sometimes are the sheep, and we have people pastoring us, whether it's the minister or other members or other leaders, but we are also called to be ministers and pastors and shepherds to each other in different ways. So I think our church has, for many years now, kind of, it's this interplay between when you are shepherd or sheep, you know?
Right.
And that's a little more empowering and a little more dynamic. And I don't know, this works.
Well, it's a lot more, it is more empowering and dynamic. There's no question. There's a lot more give and take. Whenever you encourage questions, though, it does make things messier. It makes things more gray. You don't allow sort of the black and white pat answers or pat interpretations to necessarily hold sway. And so it allows for, well, I disagree, you know, and the pastor doesn't stand up at a church like ours and seek to say, this is how it is. Or if they do, they don't usually last too long, you know, because our congregations are encouraged to think for themselves in that way. That's what faith means. So that's why we often call ourselves the question church or a question church and not an answers church. You know, there's a bit of a difference there. The ones that are always trying to provide the answers. And look, we live in a world where people are always looking for answers. Nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to faith, learning how to ask questions and empowering people to do so, I think is a much more fruitful and faithful approach. Patty, and then Marilyn.
I see the image of the sheep as a both and kind of image, and it's probably echoing what Jane said to some extent, because we are gathered in together. We live in community. The sheep live in community when they're not going off on their own. And yet, when I think about our country right now and how many individuals there are that are challenging things and saying, you know, I don't want it this way, I'm not going to be a part of community, those sheep are really lost, it seems to me. Mm-hmm. But there's this tension from the church, at least our church, and many churches, trying to gather us back in so that we don't destroy ourselves. And I think there's the image of the community and the shepherd. It's not just that the pastor is the shepherd, it's a structure that allows for community to happen. Our church is a structure that allows for community to happen, for us to engage in questions, but it also invites us not to go crazy. You know, that our faith invites us not to go crazy. We can go a little bit crazy. We can read all the Jesus seminar stuff and really go crazy.
Yeah.
But if we really read it, then we can also find deeper meaning in our association, not as sheep, but as community. Right. So I see that as a both and picture. And
crazy is certainly one word, but it's true. It's like if we're left to our own devices, we can end up spinning and we can fall down rabbit holes. And then we find ourselves in places where there's no one, at least immediately apparent, to help us out. And so community is a powerful place for exactly that, for helping us stay more grounded, but also more full of life and purpose and focus a lot of times when the world seems chaotic and is chaotic and stressful. So there is that. And that is one of the tensions right now, is in this time when community is so, we're operating at such a premium for how we do community. And it's been very much impacted, and it made it challenging to have what feels like real authentic community and empowerment like we're used to. But I also think it makes it more vital, and it reveals that it is more of a priority than ever, perhaps. And I hope that that's how it comes around ultimately, but time will tell. Time will tell. Was it Marilyn and then Margaret?
I think it was me next. When I was a young person, a girl and a teenager, and with a father who was a minister of the Congregational Church, First Congregational Church of Santa Barbara, First Congregational Church of Oakland. And then we united with other denominations and became the United Church of Christ. But in both cases, the emphasis really is on community. We were the Congregational Church. We weren't the individual church.
Right.
And it seemed to me, I learned early on some very important strategies for getting along with the other kids at Sunday school, and then our youth group, and then as an adult. And
Yes.
So it's not like, I mean, we were a community, but we were individuals within a community who learned how to get along with each other. And some of those skills have lasted me my whole life.
And you're absolutely right. The whole style of our church, the polity, the way we organized ourselves as a church, the Congregational Church, was an intentional move away from the Church of England, the King Henry VIII style, the singular, the Episcopalian style, where a bishop, has, kind of hierarchy, and then maybe a small group of people can assign, here's what we do, here's what we believe, that sort of thing. Congregational Church said, no, we want to be more democratic. And it's exactly that style of church governance that had a very had a profound effect on the shaping of our secular governance in this country. So it's a distinct style. It's a very intentional approach, and it is messy at times because it leaves people. It asks each of us to take responsibility for that. Margaret.
Well, I think when I grew up, that was accepted. You just follow the minister, whatever. But our open and affirmative have changed things, and I don't consider myself a sheep. I'm sorry, I just can't. But I come to church to hear what you are telling me and to think about it and to accept it or think more of it. I'm no sheep.
Right. But I mean, you're naming something that's true. A lot of us were raised in churches where that was the accepted way of being. And it's a very simple process, isn't it? When all you need to do is show up and just, okay, that's what's true. It does help to simplify things. And I get the motivation for that. We all are looking for clarity and more simplicity in our lives. And that is possible, but it may not happen necessarily through trying to make black and white that which is gray. So that's where, that's the rub. And I feel that what you just named is that even when we go through these times and processes where we are inviting in and accepting whole new ways of thinking, you use the example of open and affirming, we're still able through that to come to a whole new perspective and appreciation and love for our fellow human beings and for God through that. So it opens up things if we give ourselves to it. It often opens up so much more than we initially will think think, oh my gosh, everything's going to fall apart if we accept this or if we go this way. And the truth is that when we ask questions, it often, I think, leads to greater, richness and just more depth in our faith. I want to ask, so this interaction is the first time in Matthew's gospel where any woman character speaks directly to Jesus. Okay. What significance do you think that is, if any? And it could be narratively significant. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the message of the story. It could be, is it a narrative significance? Is it meant to draw our attention as hearers? It could be. I just want to hear what you might have to say. Patty.
I have to think, I don't know how they felt. This was written after the temple was destroyed.
5 to 90 is roughly the accepted time for Matthew. Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things that I ask myself is, I look at these sayings from my perspective as somebody who lives in 2021, and that's a different perspective than those folks had. I think that it must have been pretty radical that this woman was speaking, and that the biography included it, because women were not considered important. I mean, their voices weren't important. They were beginning to be important. Paul was making them more important. And probably those things were interacting at this time, just like our open and affirming stuff. There's, the pros and cons. So putting this in was probably pretty radical. But it's hard for me to see that because I live here.
Right.
And their thinking was different. This would have been heard. It's not read because nobody was reading then. They were all hearing things.
That's right.
And it was probably a radical thing to hear. The women probably loved it. And the men probably thought, what in the heck is this? But I don't know, because I'm not them. It's just
insofar as we are aware, insofar as what we can tap into what was sort of culturally accepted back then, you're naming something that's true. And I think we've named this through various Bible studies too, that women did not speak directly to a teacher like Jesus, to a rabbi like this. It was not something that was typically done. And so to do this is very much one of those moments that you're like, whoa, what's going on here? It's definitely an intention grabber. So from the audience perspective, the ones hearing the story, it's going to be like, well, okay, what's going on here? But also within the story, see how it's used on multiple levels. Within the story, it's also seen as quite offensive to the disciples. Mm-hmm. The way they respond in that sort of dismissive way. Oh, send her away. That sort of thing. It very much piques our interest and leaves us in this like, okay, well, how's he going to deal with this one? Just like the same way when you hear a scripture on Sunday mornings, and you hear the scripture and you're like, wow, I wonder how Dan's going to deal with this one. That sort of thing. It's sort of, this is the process. But what it does is it piques your interest, makes you lean in a little bit. Okay, so I think there's a couple levels that this could be interacting. The narrative level is a key one here. It's meant to wait. What's this? What's going on? It is not typical for a woman to talk like this. Again, first time in Matthew's gospel, so he's using it to great effect. Okay, and so far, go ahead, Marilyn.
I just thought not only was she a she, but not an Israelite.
Right. Mm-hmm. Naming her as a Canaanite, mm-hmm. which is a very much an archaic term. The Canaanites were the ones that were there before, Joshua finally took over the promised land kind of thing. And they were seen as like, idol worshipers and that sort of thing. So regardless, it's a way of sort of naming her as other, completely other from a certain perspective. Okay. Mm-hmm. Which is very important. Because again, we've seen so far in Matthew's gospel a very conciliatory attitude from the gospel writer towards Gentiles. Multiple healings, multiple welcomings, positive comments. Okay, so this is where it's important to say, all right, we've already seen how there's this openness, and certainly the way the gospel ends, it's the same kind of openness. What is this doing? What is this doing here? Okay, so we've got this story, and as we've been talking, it would have been presented orally. Okay, I think that might, well, if you heard verses 24 to 26, and that's like sort of to my mind, the multiple of the couple comments that Jesus makes that are like the ones that we often hear as most offensive. If we hear that, are there, like, instead of reading it, are there ways that you could hear that matter, that shift your sense of what it might mean? Can you think of a way that could be presented that might shift or alter what it seems to be when it's read on the page? Sometimes when we learn something, and Bertie used the word teachable moment. Sometimes when we learn something, it's not about someone telling us or instructing us in a direct way, but sometimes there's it's a little bit more implied, or it is inductive instead of deductive. You sort of, oh, and what if in these words, as we've sort of said, what if Jesus is not speaking from his heart, but is holding up a mirror? How does that change what this might be? Bonnie?
I'm probably going off on a tangent. I almost brought this up last week, and I thought, no, you're going down the wrong path. And but I just want to share this. We had an experience on our vacation. We went back to New England. It was wonderful, but I go to a lot of these old cemeteries and looking up ancestors and so forth. And when I was in Boston, I went to Dorchester, and Dan probably knows where that is. It's not the best part of town anymore. First, we went to the South Dorchester, and that wasn't so bad. And then we went out to North Dorchester, and you drive in there and you think, do I want to get out of the car here? Is this safe? And then I'm thinking, well, there's all these minorities. Am I being racist? And so on and so forth. Anyway, and we did get out of the car, and we did, anyway, I won't go into all of that. But when we left there, and I finally left because I said, I don't know if I'm safe here. I don't know if this is because I had on the news, there'd been a couple shootings there a couple days before. And I don't know about this part of town. And when we drove out, we came down, I think it's Massachusetts Avenue, and there's a homeless camp down both sides of the street. Tents all the way down, a few bicycles, a few baby strollers, and I was like, how do people get out of this? If they land here, how do they get out of it? But talking about the mirror thing, you could say, well, if they just get a job, what's wrong with these people? Because you've heard that so much, get a job. What's wrong with you? They ended up here because they're drug addicts, or they're this, or they're that. But it's kind of like, it really moved me, because we were staying in Winthrop, which was right near the airport, because we were flying out, and it was only 8 miles away. But we got to Winthrop, and it's mostly middle class, and even some upper middle, there's some fairly nice houses there. And I'm like, man, 8 miles, but that's like a world away from these people in the homeless camp. And it just, I don't know, the whole attitude that has been presented so many times about people is that it's their fault, they're lazy, they didn't get a job, they're this, they're that, if they go back to school, if they do this or that. And it's just, when I see Christ, when I see Jesus saying that about the woman, the Canaanite woman, it's sort of kind of a parallel to well, isn't this what it's like? Isn't this why? Isn't this how we treat these people? And so I don't know. I just wanted to share that.
Bonnie, it seems to me that virtually every time you offer something and you preface it by saying, I think this is on a tangent, it seems to me that it is spot on. So I'm not going to tell you to stop saying that, but when you say that, that's one of my cues to listen up, because you're right on it. And I feel, what if that this story, much like the example you just shared, is a way of understanding, hey, when prejudices and generalizations meet living, breathing humanity, which one wins? Which one moves us? And what if Jesus was saying, all right, here's an example of a person we're supposed to hate, or we're supposed to be suspicious of, or we're supposed to dismiss. Disciples illustrate that right away. So Jesus picks it up and says, all right, how does this sound to you? How does this sound? Hey, I'm not here for you. I'm going to ignore you and your begging of your daughter needing to be healed. How's that sound, guys? Hey, I'll take it one step further. Dog, you don't even deserve the food off the table. Dog, that's the way this could come across. And when he's naming that, it's not about him. And in fact, it's not really about her. It's about the disciples, and it's about the audience who accepted those things. Just like you were saying, Bonnie, what about all those things that we hold to be true about people, but are not necessarily true, but what they do is they preserve a veneer of distance so that we need not engage. Oh, well, if only they did this, they could, look, when you meet a living, breathing human being, your generalizations often change. That's why, Margaret brought up the example of open and affirming. When those conversations happened in this church and in the other two churches that I was a part of, generally there's this place where people have attitudes and opinions and things they think they know and what the Bible says and blah, blah, blah. But then you meet someone in the flesh and you find out that all they want to do is love who they are predisposed to love. And they want to be affirmed for that and not shunned. It's a no-brainer. Well, not always, but I think so. And I think that's part of what might be happening here. Any reflections or comments about that? Patty?
The question that I have has to do with the writer, and how the writer captures Jesus mirroring. Because it's a writer who's writing this. And I mean, I don't know how to see it. No, that's not the right word. Could he possibly have seen it beside himself? I mean, is Jesus coming through him anyway? I mean, this is a turbulent time. We don't know who Jesus is. They don't really know who Jesus is. They think they know who Jesus is. The guy seems very mixed in his images. He may be thinking like the disciples, I don't know, but the story it sounds like the story is reflecting Jesus through mirroring, coming through this writer. And that's a mystery to me. That's just a mystery.
Reflecting the attitudes of the day. And he was talking to a people who certainly had an idea of what being the chosen sheep, the chosen ones, meant.
Right.
They thought it was a statement of privilege. And maybe it's something different. Maybe it's something different. And that's part of what the gospel says from beginning to end, that this idea of being chosen, and we'll come back to that. What does it really mean? What does being chosen look like? What does it ask of us? Does it separate us? Does it make us better than other people? Or does it bring us into a whole different sense of relationship and responsibility? Okay, that sounds maybe not so to us, but it certainly was to them.
Yeah.
It certainly was to those early generations who had all these expectations about what it meant to be the chosen people, what their Messiah was going to look like, who was in, who was out, that sort of thing. Margaret, was that a hand up?
Yes. When our church decided to vote on open and affirmative, I was shocked how many of our members left. I couldn't, that woke me up. I thought, maybe I was like that, but I'm not going to be like that anymore. It really woke me up. And I pray for them, and some come back, but I guess it's just born in them or whatever. I don't know. There's another sheep that I'm not. Okay.
There's a lot, it's a complicated, there's a lot of things that make that complicated for folks. What they've known, their whole approach to life, to faith, to the Bible, to what's right, to what's wrong, to what's true, all of these things. And there's a continuum, and it doesn't always happen for people right away. And so much like the rich young ruler who goes off sad because he couldn't do what Jesus was asking him, my feeling is that for those people, as you sort of suggested, those people that may have dropped off or decided that that was the litmus test for them that decided whether or not they'd stay with or break fellowship, that there's still seeds of possibility and growth and opportunity that can happen, and God's still alive and working. So I need not overly dwell on that, that they can grow through that. And our job is to keep encouraging that growth, without doing necessarily focusing too much on the finger wagging part, which unfortunately is easy to do. We all want to feel righteous at times. We all want to feel that we are better than at times. And some of these very stories that we're looking at, and this one into today, that's what it's touching on. He's really challenging those people who feel better than, and in this case, it's the disciples and perhaps the audience, of Matthew's gospel. Are you really better than? Who's the one that's showing what real faith looks like? Well, whose faith is celebrated in this story? It's a powerful example, I think. Here's something. In Matthew's gospel, the Sermon on the Mount happens in chapters 5 through 7. And one of the most famous passages in the Sermon on the Mount is the whole turn the other cheek thing, which is not a statement of just be humble and don't hit back. No. It's actually a very powerful statement of standing up for your dignity, of not responding to violence with more violence, but turning your cheek and saying, all right, if you're going to slap me in the backhand way, that's dismissive. I'm going to give you the other cheek so you can smack me with the open hand and treat me like an equal. And I'm going to stand here and I'm not going to go away. If you're going to require me to hold your pack, soldier, Roman centurion, I'm not just going to go the required mile by law. I'm going to go an extra mile because I can choose to, because that's my choice. That's dignity. That's power. I'm not allow an oppressive system to control me. That's what this is about. So then in so many ways, this woman in this story is embodying that turn the other cheek mentality. In her response, okay? She does not back down. It's really poignant, isn't it? It's very powerful. Steve?
Well, that's the thing that struck me is this woman, not really of the Jewish folk, and yet she hears that the healer is coming to town, and in her desperation for her daughter, who is possessed by demons, and that's kind of shorthand for mental illness in the time, or could be. I thought her desperation came out, and when she falls before Jesus, and he basically insults her right off the bat, and she says, "That's okay, I'll take the crumbs from your table." And I think that's a turning point for maybe Jesus, because he realizes that he's not just there for the Jews, he's there for everyone.
But I do think, and many people have speculated that, but if you look at the bigger context of Matthew, I think he's already aware of that. And the ones who are less aware of that are those like the disciples and those like his audience, the audience of Matthew, not Jesus' audience, but the audience of the Matthew gospel. So it may be that Jesus is learning in that moment. I find that to be a little bit tough to really kind of come fully to terms with because of the way he's already been presented in the gospel as being inclusive. The ones that don't seem to get it, are often his followers, the ones that are stuck in those traditional views. So maybe, and again, I say that because we don't have no one left us like, here's the key to understanding all these stories. But maybe it's a creative and jarring way to allow the disciples, by holding up a mirror, to allow the audience to see how devoid of humanity and faith their ideas are. It's sort of like when we went through, the civil rights movement and the countertop, the eating in the diner, the Rosa Parks on the bus. All of these things became moments that were important, but really, what was the one that galvanized everybody? It was when Bull Connor turned on those darn hoses on children. And then all of a sudden, those old attitudes were like, this is inhuman. There's something there that I find parallel to what might be happening in this passage. That it's not about, there's a point where you're not about giving more information to people. You're holding up a mirror to them and saying, all right, this is what is wrought by these attitudes. Are you going to hold on to them? Is this what's most important to you? That sort of thing. Really, really powerful teaching when it's lifted up like that. And in a sense, as some of you have said, it may be that Jesus is learning, but I feel that the text doesn't give us a sense that he's actually learning. He's not compelled by anything. He seems to be more sovereign in this, like just aware of what's going on. It's hard, I know it's not necessarily, you may be reading it, each of you seeing it a little differently, but to me, Jesus doesn't seem like he's waffling here. He doesn't seem like it's he just seems to be saying, okay, your faith has saved you. Some people speculate, was he testing her? If that's the case, he didn't test anyone else in the similar way who came to him asking for healing. So there's a lot of things that if we choose certain tacks on reading this, it's like, well, but how does it lay with everything else that's happened? Again, it's not to rule them out. It's just that when we try to figure out what might this be saying, how does it fit with all the other things that we've seen even up to this point? And that can help us. It can also muddy the waters, but it can help us a lot of times to figure out, Patty?
The thing that I'm getting from what you're saying, and probably everyone's gotten it, but is that when I look at this, I'm reading it and that's flat. But when you talk about it being presented almost like a play, almost like a film, that what there's a gestalt in that's different than from reading it. The gestalt captures more of the essence of what's happening then. I can't get that from reading it, but I can get it when you say that. Look at it as a mirror. Look at it as a presentation. Look at it like we looked at the guys spraying children. When we see that, it touches us in a different way. It touches me in a different way, and it captures more of what reality is too, or the reality that was then. And not the reality that confuses me because of the reality of now. And also not just the reality of now, but my tendency to look to reality through books rather than action. Yeah. And he's certainly demonstrating the result of caste, the caste system. He's kind of making a whole picture right there for all of us. And just like we did with the open and affirming. Yeah, he's helping them to see and understand what the impact, what the results, what is wrought by their sort of views and their expectations in a way that then invites them into a different place, a different way of following, a different place of faith. It's true for the disciples in the story, and it would be true for the hearers, and even for us who are that much more removed from kind of that initial
experience. And again, insofar as we can hear this instead of reading it, it at least gives us a chance to say, all right, well, there's a lot of opportunity here for nuance. And if Jesus is recognizing this as a teachable moment, and as it seems, the way it's written, he doesn't interact with this woman until the disciples show up. And the way he speaks is kind of just, you can almost picture him turning and looking over his shoulder at them as he's saying this and saying, I'm speaking what you're saying, what your society is saying. Is this feeling true to you now? That sort of thing. There's the way that it's written like that, at least leaves room for that. And so that's all I'm trying to get to, because there's still room for the other interpretations in this too. But that way of looking at this story is not one that is often apparent to us as a possibility or as a plausibility. And yet, when you look at it in the context of the gospel, it very much feels there's a consistency there. Because again, we've seen already this welcome, this appreciation of Gentiles and their needs and their concerns, on top of with the house of Israel. There's a concern for them too.
One of the things that
it's not an either or.
One of the things that it does for me is connect me with the notion that Jesus embodied divine justice, that he lived it for us, with them. And divine justice is, it's much bigger than words. It's the way. It goes back to the way. How do we live the way? And perhaps living the way isn't just being a teacher with words, but being a teacher with cleverness and much bigger than I had been thinking.
We need to make sure we give Jesus credit as a master teacher, because he was. Why wouldn't he use every tool at his disposal? Because he has. We've seen him use humor. He uses puzzling comments. He will do these things that absolutely flip people on their heads and their expectations. He'll tell these stories that lead you down this one path, and then at the end, he'll just grab you like Hitchcock almost. So it's like there's so many ways that, that's why we have these Gospels, because he was obviously a compelling figure. And so these stories get passed down and they're just amazing. So he uses all sorts of tools to communicate the message. And it's not just didactic. It's not just, like any good teacher, he's going to get in there and help people see from all sorts of different perspectives, because he knows we all learn differently. We all receive things differently, and it takes time. So yeah, give him credit for being a master teacher. And at least it leaves open the possibility that he could do these creative things.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
I'm thinking about us for a moment, and how we have talked and said some really very insightful, provocative things from my point of view, based on a paragraph.
Yeah.
And that really, when you talk about master teacher and how we responded.
But this is true. But this is, that's how it is, isn't it? That's what's so wonderful about the scriptures, is that there's so many of these moments where there's so much meaning and richness wrapped up in these brief passages that are often pivotal. We selected this one because it's pivotal. There's a sense of movement, of transition, of conflict. And so we look at that, and you're right. It's amazing what can get opened when we really give ourselves to saying, all right, let's try to get underneath it. Because at face value, it doesn't leave you with a very good impression of Jesus. And I'm not sitting here trying to explain it all away. It's not about saying, well, we got to make Jesus look nice here. No, I don't think it's about that. And I still leave room for the possibility that he was speaking his own mind, and he had the prejudices of his day as well. And then he learned. It's not as compelling to me though, because it just feels inserted there again, when we've already seen him interacting in the ways he has. So this whole idea that he's using this as a teachable moment and sort of letting them see with that mirror approach, it really feels, I find that compelling. I didn't come up with this. It was actually, I first heard about it with my New Testament teacher, who sort of said, consider this. And I just found it to be so wow, opening to look at it that way. And again, not at the dismissal of other perspectives, but just to say, okay, when we look at perspectives, when we look at possible paths through Scripture, we look at one and then we compare it. And like any sort of theory, you sort of see what supports it and where it finds strength and rootedness and then meaning, where it leads me. And so that's all part of this quest for truth. I'm not telling you that is what it means, but I'm saying look at that as a real opportunity to kind of consider this passage from a whole different perspective, and one that you may find fits well with the overall structure of the gospel as you look at it. I do want to say that I have one more sort of question that pertains to both back at that day, but also our own perceptions of this. This story in general is about what it looks like to be chosen, to be those sheep, the ones that are sheep and the ones shepherded by God. And you're dealing with a day when a lot of people had this idea that being chosen meant a certain thing, But the truth is, within Judaism, even within ancient Israel, there are teachings that said that God is not just a God of the Jews, but God is a God of all nations. That is well attested within the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, of the Jewish Bible. So it's a very interesting dynamic that we're presented here. And what it is that there are some within the tradition that thought that being chosen meant a place of privilege, a place of exclusivity, like we're part of a club. And yet Jesus seems to be saying that no, being chosen might be about something else, maybe about what our responsibilities are to one another, but especially to those that our society or our laws or our mores have taught us, are the ones that are supposed to be excluded. So being chosen, what does it mean to you as your understanding of what being chosen is? And I'm talking in the biblical sense of being chosen, and that's within Judaism and within Christianity, because it's continued. Just, if you can, put into words, just reflect on what does being chosen look like for you? And how does this story maybe impact that? Had you thought about being chosen, much, and what it really entails? Chosen to, or chosen for, these are different ideas. Chosen to because I'm this or that, certain bloodline, certain prominence. There's a lot of ways that we still are a culture of where being chosen is quite, it's quite a privilege. It's quite exclusive. There's a lot of ways that's true, but within the church, we're naming it in a different way. We're not chosen because we're better than, but it's leading us somewhere. It's leading us to see each other differently and understand that we're chosen for something. So what is it? What is it that we're chosen for? Bonnie?
I don't know if this is the same thing. I think it's Paul that talks about how we're given gifts. And so when I think within the church, I think of people that have a gift of music, or people that have a gift of teaching, or a gift of working with children, or a gift of, whatever their passion is, or whatever their talent, or sometimes it's inborn, like somebody like Linda that has a wonderful, beautiful voice. I don't know if that's, if having a gift and being chosen, when you first talk about being chosen, and you think of outside of the church, I think of the royal family, or I think of people that
yes, that's what we're given a lot of
or a lot of money through their, not because they did anything, but because one of their ancestors or grandfathers or somebody made a lot of money and therefore they just inherit it. So they're sort of chosen because they're in this society sort of above everybody else and they can have a lot more money than most people do. But within the church, I guess I sort of, think of it more as having a gift and, what your sort of calling is. I don't know if that's right. I know what it's not. It's not like the 144,000, you're either in or out.
But I think there's a way that this story and others like it are dealing with a tension, perhaps a crossroads with coming to terms with this, that there are a number within Israel that do have that sort of expectation that being chosen means that there is a privilege, there is something that we get for this, that sort of thing. And yet they're living in a time where everything's falling apart. And so they're having to redefine, well, what does this look like? And maybe it's not what we always thought. That sort of thing is happening. And as far as the church goes, you're absolutely right. It was not set up, whether in Paul or in Acts, so Luke writing Acts, it was set up to be something much different in terms of the way we utilize those gifts that you named. And the point is that being chosen doesn't mean we get our gifts and we get to go hold it back and enjoy them for ourselves, right? That's never the way that it's presented. It's always, okay, now take it to community, take it to one another and glorify God by the way you utilize and share your gifts, that part of you that is that, what's chosen, within you. That's what being chosen means, that we have that responsibility to live for one another and in broader ways than we thought. So when we bump up against our prejudice, when we see the mirror clearly, that's the charge. There's a responsibility there. And what are we going to do with that? Notice Jesus isn't wagging a finger at the disciples in this story. He's praising the faith of the woman, but he leaves their own prejudices on the table to be seen by all of us. And then it's about, okay, so now what do you do? What are you going to do? Okay, he's not telling them didactically. He's letting them infer it themselves. Patty?
So when I hear the word chosen, I think from my own experience, I became a Christian when I was 34, and I didn't feel like I got chosen. I felt like I woke up. I felt like, and still believe that we're all chosen, but sometimes we haven't progressed enough, or whatever we do, to see God, to feel God. Before I experienced God, I didn't experience God. And there was a moment where I felt like just that, like there was an opening of my mind. And I don't know how to explain that kind of experience. But after that happened, I became a searcher and explored religion in every place I could find it. And so I feel like God is for all of us always. And even when we go away, going away doesn't mean going away. It means trying to find our way away from things. And so there have been times when I have gone away and then have been called back in major ways. And so all I can say about it is that I think we're all chosen and we're all gifted. And I feel for myself that I have to continually grapple how to give that, how to be that, not just for myself, but in this community, because I think most of all, our life is in a community loving God and being loved by God and seeing the love of God in all of us. Yeah. I mean, that's what's so cool about Bible study.
Yeah.
What Marilyn was saying, that we could get so much, not just, I mean, you start us off, but the rest of us go like gangbusters. And that's kind of cool. And it's that, and that's why the saying that God is still speaking is important, because it didn't get stopped. We've tried to stop it by cementing it into, these four gospels, but it's just breaking out, and it breaks out in tragedy. It breaks out in all of that stuff. And so that's what I'm going to stop.
It's tinder for holy fire, and it happens most every time we gather like this. And I think that when we look at these stories, and it frees us to explore, meaning within text, sure, but meaning within our own lives. That's where the real, the beauty comes out, because it's not a question of if I share the gifts. It's like you said, it's a question of grappling with how. And we're always doing that, because it's not necessarily going to be the same thing every day. That's incredibly inspiring and hopeful, because it can get dull and rote to do the same thing every day. Oh, this is what I do. That ends up being, you just sort of feel like a workhorse or something, a draft horse does that. They're pulling the same look. We have so much more richness and freedom and opportunity, and the way this can shape is so much more wide open. We don't always see it that way. We don't always approach our lives that way. But that, to me, is the break open truth that Jesus and the gospel writers are getting on about. They're trying to teach us to break open those perspectives when they get stale. Get those new prescription glasses and whoa, see the world differently. Don't just stay stuck, because there's so many more possibilities than you realize. And oftentimes when you do stop growing and stop exploring that way, stop being a seeker, then you get stuck in those places, and then you stop looking, and it's all around you still. So, these are challenging passages, but they're intended to kind of, like you said, wake us up, maybe smack us up the head a little bit, in a loving way, whatever it takes. Because this isn't just sort of optional. This is about how we live and thrive and grow as a humanity, as the children of this greater being that creates and shapes all of us all the time. So this relationship is something that deeply matters. And we're taking it very seriously as we look at this stuff, and as we consider what we're going to do with it as soon as I turn this thing off today. That's really where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? But it sure is awesome and fun to do this. I love it. And I hope, your responses indicate that it's that you share that. So any closing comments? Jane?
Well, just hearing this last little bit, it just makes me feel like Jesus, as he's talking, showing the mirror to his disciples, am I like those disciples? Am I saying, oh, get rid of that person? They're not worthy. They're other. They're different.
Yeah.
This has been something that we're grappling with in a big way over these last years.
Yes.
Of how we treat everybody from homeless to refugees to, all kinds of people with mental illness, all the different things. And it's Jesus speaking to me, just like he's speaking to his disciples and saying, yeah, are you treating her just like a dog and giving her the little bit of crumbs? Or are you giving the best of you that I have entrusted in you, Jane, to reach out and love other people and do for other people? So to me, here, this last part is very huge for me to really now think about. And this is something that keeps coming up over and over, I think, for all of us this last few years, particularly.
Sure.
So I'm grateful to see this passage in a new light.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does speak to me, because I can be like those disciples. I mean, I can be just like them. And then the last point that we never got to me, was how he talks about her faith.
Mm-hmm.
And because she had faith, she'll be healed. Her daughter will be healed. Mm-hmm. And he praises her for that. And I still take these kind of passages a little bit, they're a little hard for me, because it makes it continues that idea of, if you have enough faith, if you keep being persistent and putting yourself out there with God, God will heal you. And God doesn't always do physical healing.
Right.
And we've seen too many people die from cancer to know that. And so I don't know why we keep having scriptures that make us feel like God will heal us.
But healing in terms of healing in the Gospels is often about a return to community and a return to
Right.
being a part of community. And in this story, in a lot of ways, it's not about the woman, it's about the disciples, the way he's explaining it. And when he tells the woman, your faith has made made your daughter well, that is, it's important for the woman and for her daughter, certainly, but it's also very important for the disciples who see once again that she is a part of this movement. She's on the path. Jesus just told them that she's on the path, and they're the ones that are supposed to be on the path as the disciples. It's really it's very challenging on a lot of levels. But nonetheless, your specific point is true, that we all need to grapple with the way these healing stories can sometimes, and we want them to be kind of communicating this idea that if we have enough faith, that God heals in those physical ways. Look, healing can happen that way, but oftentimes it's a return to wholeness and reconnection with the fullness of human community that is the healing. Regardless of the physical symptoms that we have. And it can be hard to separate the two, for sure. So I honor that. And that is one that it hits home depending on what is happening in our lives and our circumstances and the amount of, what we've been dealing with in terms of some of that loss and illness. But in terms of this story, it reshapes who we are and who we see as being part of or not. And it's a challenge, especially in a world right now where it's all about cancel culture. And we're sort of like, oh, disagree with you. Oh, you said something stupid 10 years ago. Oh, you're a horrible person now. You're canceled. And Jesus would never have been about that. And these stories are not about canceling. They're not about calling out so much as calling in and being kind and firm and standing up for what's true and right, in the way that this turn the other cheek thing, but not backing down, not apologizing, but being connected and sort of leaning into connection, especially when it gets harder. And that's what's being asked of us now with the return to church and the challenges of finding community in a COVID time, but also with this time of cancel culture. So I hope that this, even though it may not be a complete story here that we've touched on, I hope that what we have examined will continue to germinate in you, and you'll find yourself, maybe seeing your own mirrors, and that's good. Mm-hmm. That is good. Mm-hmm. And not judging yourself because of your mirrors, but just learning, because we all have these things and we bump into them. And the growth of faith is not about shaming ourselves or canceling ourselves because we missed it, but it's about saying, okay, there's my chance, and I'm going to have another chance, maybe later, 5 minutes down the road, maybe tomorrow, who knows? But it's about saying, I'm going to grow from this. I want to learn. I want to see more clearly so that I might walk more nearly on the path with the one who's been showing us the way. So thank you, friends, for being a part of that ongoing conversation and practice.
Oh, thank you, Dan.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week. Oh, and our passage next week is twofold. It's Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 30, and then Luke chapter 13, verses 22 to 30. It'll be in the notes.
Please say
It'll
that
be in the
again,
notes, or if you have the schedule, but it's Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 30, and then Luke 13, verses 22 to 30. And I'm calling it hell, outer darkness, weeping and gnashing. So,
oh boy.
Yeah, let's just jump right into more good head scratching sayings. Okay, friends. Hope you have a great week. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.